the jungle wasn't used to visitors. For thousands of years, its vibrant emerald vegetation had laid undefiled by the corrupting gaze of mankind. Those few foolish enough to wander in, lured perhaps by the legends of a hidden treasure that awaited them at its heart, became ensnared in the thorny embrace of its arms, never to be heard from again. There were those who worshipped the jungle and the thing that lived residing deep inside it, a tribe that lived just on its outskirts. They prayed to it, asking for mercy and protection. The jungle enjoyed their fear, thrived off it. But today was different. There was someone new traversing its ancient shadowed trees, and she was not afraid. Eva Barker had been wandering this godforsaken jungle for 3 whole days when she found the entryway. She would have found it sooner if that damn shaman hadn't been so vague with his directions. It was so obscurely hidden beneath the thick, gnarled foliage that she would have been forgiven for missing it. No, not forgiven. She would not have that kind of luxury. Forgiveness wasn't in Cecile's vocabulary. That bastard. And if she had sauntered out of the jungle empty-handed, he would have put a bullet in her brain, just like he did to Samantha. Oh God, Samantha. She'd stopped herself from recalling the events of the past few days, just busied herself with the mission at hand. But she couldn't take it anymore. All the memories came roaring to the front, and she began to violently strike at the large mottled tree next to her, banging her fist on the sturdy wood over and over again until her hands were covered in blood. She shouted until her throat was sore and her nerves were fried. "Damn it, Samantha! Why?" she rasped. She sank to the jungle floor, exhausted. "Look at me," she thought to herself. "I'm so pathetic." If her father was still alive to see how far she'd fallen from the family tree, he would have disowned her on the spot. Unlike the world-renowned anthropologist Stephen Barker, who had come by his treasures legally, Eva had veered onto a path paved by deceit and thievery. For 15 long years, she and her partner Samantha King had raided the most ancient tombs and stolen the most guarded secrets of the world. She had no regrets, and, if given the chance, would do it all over again. She loved it all. The sweet thrill of discovery, the adrenaline of the chase. But, well, Samantha had grown tired of it all, and yearned for a more normal life. At first, Eva couldn't understand why anyone would want a normal life. What was that, even? A steady job? A couple of kids in a nice house with a white picket fence in a gated community? Fuck, no. But Eva loved Samantha with all her heart. Ever since she'd first laid eyes on her in that alluring red dress at that dull party at the American Museum of Natural History all those years ago. She was willing to set aside her own aspirations to be with her. Well, they had promised each other that this would be the last time. A pristine jungle in the wilds of South America that was said to hide the greatest wealth the world had ever known. They would go and take their shares and live out the rest of their lives on some pig farm or whatever the fuck in Texas. But now, Samantha was gone, murdered by Cecil Bright. Eva knew from the beginning that he couldn't be trusted, knew that he was nothing more than a conniving 2-bit fuck. And it turned out she was right. At first, he played by their rules. Over the course of several weeks, the trio had gained the trust and admiration of the tribe that lived on the jungle's outskirts. They'd learned their customs and rituals, even entertained their inane talk of an ancient evil that lived deep in the thicket. A creature made of sand that possessed the secrets of life and death. But those were just stories, superstitious nonsense by a people who didn't know any better. As time went on, Cecil grew more and more unstable, his patience wearing thin. And then, one day, he lost his mind and beat the shaman to a bloody pulp, forcing him at gunpoint to divulge the location of the treasure. For the shaman's compliance, he was rewarded with a bullet. The pale white walls of the hut dyed red with his blood. Eva couldn't believe her eyes. Call her a thief and a liar all you want, but she was no murderer. Samantha had tried to reason with Cecil, but whatever reason he had left in his little brain had fled long ago. He gunned Samantha down, putting a bullet through her spine. As she lay dying, he laughed in her face and finished the job. He gave Eva an ultimatum. Go and retrieve the treasure for him, or end up like the rest. Eva reluctantly agreed, and now here she was, 3 days later, a teary, sweaty mess lying on the jungle floor. She got up to her feet and went over to inspect the entryway. It was a large gaping hole hiding on the side of a rocky wall, covered in thick, thorny vines that curled themselves tightly around the doorway. Eva took a machete and started whacking at the constricting cuticles. But instead of chopped bark, her hit sent hot crimson blood spurting into her face. After a few more hits, an unearthly wail echoed from inside the gaping blackness of the entryway, a scream so haunting that it sent shivers down her spine. Then the vines began to move and unknotted their twisted fingers, leaving the entryway wide open. Eva peered inside. Blackness as dark as night stared back, taunting her to come inside if she dared. She took a moment to steady her nerves, and with a final sigh of resignation, she plunged into the darkness. She wandered for what seemed like days, traversing the blackness with only the lonely beam of her flashlight as company. But it might as well have been off. It did nothing to alleviate the oppressiveness of the place. There was nothing to hold on to, nothing to see. It was as if she was floating in a darkened void, lost in its shadow. At long last, she saw a glimmer of light up ahead of her, a sliver of hope in this dismal place. She ran towards it. Anything was better than this wicked twilight zone. When she got closer to the light, she saw that it was emanating from an open passageway. The first thing she noticed as she stepped through was the acrid aroma of decay that scented the fetid air. It struck her by surprise, and she fell into a coughing fit, gagging and trying her best not to vomit. She wrapped a scarf around the lower part of her face to mask the smell. As she gained composure, she saw that she was in a long, spacious room piled high with gold. Well, it spilled out of every corner, had invaded every last crevice of the place. She couldn't believe her eyes. The legends were true. There were enough riches here to last multiple lifetimes. As she continued to scan the place, her eyes landed on the source of that disgusting smell. There, in the center of the room, was the body of a man, or at least what used to be a man. Its long, emaciated body lay sitting on a throne of pain. Hundreds of snake-like vines were wrapped around it, driving their needle-sharp thorns into every inch of its virgin flesh. Its bones were contorted, distorted into impossible positions. Where its eyes and mouth should have been, only jagged, blood-encrusted holes remained. Eva couldn't help but be drawn to this thing. She was mesmerized by its defiled body. Despite the pain that ravaged its soul, it seemed at peace, so content, so serene, so beautiful. As she neared the creature, she could see its chest rise and fall, could hear its harsh, ragged sighs. So it was still alive. How could something like this be in so much pain and still be alive? As if hearing her thoughts, the thing lifted its head and stared at her through its bloody, empty holes. It began to laugh, a haunting and maniacal cackle. Its body shook and contorted, its bones snapping from the movement. Sand spewed forth from every hole in its body as the laughter grew louder and louder into a cacophonous cackle that permeated into Eva's very soul. It raised its bony fingers and beckoned her towards it. The entire room had started to fill with rosy, blood-freckled sand, but she didn't care. All that mattered was the creature. She embraced it, letting the thorns cut into her skin, piercing every inch of her body. She ran her delicate fingers over its scarred, cratered face and plunged her arms deep into its cavernous eye cavities. From out of the holes, she produced a chunky stream of rotted gore. Suddenly, an immense hunger panged her, driving deep into her gut. She regarded the offal for another moment, and then began to feed, devouring it without a second thought. She hadn't eaten for days and was starving. Pleasure racked her body, and she groaned, wiping the blood all over her face and body. She leaned down and kissed it, slipping her tongue deep into its mouth hole, savoring every lick and suck. Sand began to spew out from it, flowing into her mouth and down her throat. She sputtered, choking, drowning in the sand that was filling her body and coursing through her veins. But she wasn't afraid. No, Eva felt a calmness engulf her entire being. Then the sand invaded every part of her being, and she was no more. Cecil paced furiously up and down the hut. Where was she? Where the fuck was she? It had been 3 whole days, and she still hadn't returned. It was a simple task. Go in, take the treasure, leave. Oh, she had probably taken it all for herself and fled. Hadn't she, that bitch? He thought. He should have gone and done it himself. He reached for his gun and prepared to leave this backward place. Never sent a woman to do a man's job, he thought bitterly. But as he opened the flaps of the hut, a sharp, horrendous smell punctuated the air. He turned and came face to face with Eva, or at least what was left of her. Her limbs were stretched out of proportion, long and spindly spider legs and arms. Her belly was bloated and bulging, and a large, caved-in, bloody hole was where her face used to be. "Eva," Cecil asked, "is that you? What the fuck happened?" But the Eva thing didn't respond. It only stood there, motionless. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was upon him, tearing into his flesh. He tried to fire at it, but the bullets had no effect. They were simply absorbed into the scarred body. Eva tore his body limb from limb, and Cecil screamed and screamed and screamed. Well, the tribespeople had heard poor Cecil's cries for help, but they were too afraid to enter the hut. At long last the screams died out, and all was quiet. Eva stepped out from the hut, her mutilated body drenched in sand and blood. The tribespeople gasped and fell to their knees in reverence and awe. The prophecy had proven true, and their queen had finally returned. The jungle was alive. It was finally free, and it felt so very, very hungry.
Hey there. Thank you so much for taking the time to drop by and listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me. I put a lot of time and effort into making these videos, so it's nice to know that there's someone out there listening. Do me a little favor, would you? Click that like button, leave a comment, and if you really feel like it, why not subscribe too? Okay, happy tales everyone. See you soon.